Action. Good morning. It's June 12th, 2020, and we're out in our Fidelitas estate vineyard, block 1, which is Cabernet Sauvignon, planted in 2008. So we're about 10 years into this now. This is Clone 2 Cabernet Sauvignon, and we're about 2/3 to 3/4 of our way through bloom and set. So you can see on some of these clusters the berries are starting to form, and we've got a good sized crop here, and that's a real important step in the whole process. We're probably 90 to 100 days away from harvest now. Once we get to this point, there's always the 100 days that we talk about. Some of the next steps that we'll do would be coming back in. You can see we have some movable wires here. We'll get the trellis all up and away from some of the morning side of the vines, get that fruit exposed and get the sunlight in there. Maybe come along and do a little bit of leaf removal in the fruiting zone to expose that fruit a little bit more. And then the next step after that would be, once we get to veraison, which is the change from the green berries to starting to turn red and ripen, we'd come back in and do another cluster thinning then. So we're shooting for somewhere between 3 to 3.5 tons per acre. That's pretty consistent with what we get from this block year after year. This is the block that's the main part of our estate Cabernet Sauvignon, the next vintage of which will release the 2017 coming this fall. We're here in what we refer to as Block 3A, which is the first planting of the Clone 6 Cabernet Sauvignon. This was planted at the same time that the other block was planted, 2008. This is what's referred to as the winemaker's clone, because typically you don't get a very big crop, but what crop you do get is very very good. The quality level is usually great, but you don't usually get more than 2 to 2.5 tons per acre. So it's tough to justify that from a viticultural standpoint if you're just a grower in itself. But since these are our own estate vines, we don't see the problem with doing that. We really like it. So these two blocks combine to go into our estate wines. One of the things that you see with this clone typically is a little bit of what we call shatter. So you can see how there's not as many berries per cluster, and that's just inherent to this clone itself. And so because with reduced number of berries, then your cluster weight is reduced, and thus a lower tonnage. We're now in the 2015 planting of the Petit Verdot. We have just a little block of this, just around an acre. You can see the difference here. The cluster's already set completely, so there's no flowering in it at all. And you can just see the difference in the shape of the cluster itself. So this would be, I think, our 4th crop off of here. And we really like what we're getting from this block, and looking to make some single vineyard wines from this variety somewhere in the future. So here we are in part of what we call phase 2, the second planting, which we did in 2015, and we're in one of the clones of Cabernet that we have here called 412. I had heard some real positive things about this clone from other winemakers and grape growers, and so when we found that some was available from the nursery, we decided to add this to the planting. It's one of the what we refer to as on-top clones. So one of the clones that's still controlled by the French agricultural department. And so when we bought this, you do pay a fee to use the clone. We have 6 different clones of Cabernet Sauvignon in this estate vineyard, which is around 12 acres total. One of the things we're trying to do is get a lot of different components. The clones do taste different from each other, and then bring those together and have a lot of options when it comes to being able to blend. Once the wines are in barrel after about a year, we can then look at what the individual clones are giving to us and make the blends. And these clones continue to develop as they mature and get older. The wines change, and so some of these might end up in our estate vineyard Cabernet Sauvignon at some point, but right now we're looking to use them in some of the other blends that we have, including our new estate red blend. So we're here in the Malbec that we have in the 2015 planting. So we did put in a little bit of Malbec just so that we would have all of the Bordeaux varieties that we wanted to work with. You can see Malbec does look different than the other vines for sure. It's got kind of this droopy look to the leaves and the way that the shoots look. Sometimes the leaves look a little bit different. And also one of the things that jumps out to me right here is the fact that we've got way too much fruit. And so this will be one that will probably come through and do a really aggressive cluster thinning, probably right at veraison. One of the other things that we'll do is get the morning sun side, which is the side that we're looking at right here, actually get some of these leaves out of the fruiting zone so that we can get the fruit exposed to the morning sun. You don't typically do this on the afternoon side because the sun will get a little bit of problem with sunburn, so that's not a problem on the morning side, but you can just see the congestion in here. We try to get things down to, at the most, 2 clusters on a really healthy shoot. Like this one, we could typically, carry 2 clusters on a shoot like this and ripen that nicely. So we're here in one of the new plantings of clone 169 Cabernet Sauvignon. We're really seeing some really positive results that we're seeing in the wine itself from what we're getting fruit-wise off this block. You can kind of see where we have a little bit more of a steeper southern slope, not extreme slope, but definitely seeing a difference in quality between the southern side and the northern side of our estate vineyard. This is a clone that we like in a lot of other locations, and it's really turning out well for us here. Very early ripening clone typically. And again, if we did a close-up of a cluster, you'd see us, almost completely through bloom and set here. Another thing, if we'll talk a little bit about here, is what we call these Ice Age erratics. So these large rocks like this typically came with the Great Floods. So the Missoula floods, these rocks were probably attached to big chunks of ice that floated when the dam gave away, and the ice dam gave away in Lake Missoula in Montana. It carried along with it huge pieces of basalt rock like this. These are actually fairly small erratics. There's places on the mountain where these large erratics will be, these erratics will be 5, 6 feet high, and they have to be moved out if we're going to plant. And also, sometimes you can see the smaller ones along here like this. Um, they're here, and then as you work the land over time, the smaller radics kind of come up out of the soil on their own as you start to work around them. But really an interesting, piece of the the geology and what's going on in the soils here on Red Mountain. So we're in our estate Merlot, also planted in 2015. Um, this is one of those varieties I think that we don't talk that much about, but really, if you look in the history of Washington wine, it's kind of the variety that really put us on the world wine map. We've really taken Cabernet Sauvignon and run with it a little bit, but really, as many of you know, this is one of my favorite varietals. I like working with it, and I always have. You can see through these clusters that they're well through bloom and set, and we're starting to get some size to the berry itself. And this is usually the first variety that we pick, so it's always the earliest that we get to. The other thing that we look at is, do we have enough canopy now that we could really start to kind of shut this canopy down and not let it elongate and continue to grow, and then have to deal with that. So really what we've got is enough canopy here now to pretty much ripen the fruit that we have on the vine, and that's important. So we can really regulate our canopy growth now with how much water we put on. So enough water that we keep the plant in good shape, but we don't want to necessarily grow the canopy and have this big, huge canopy that's hard to deal with, because then we end up with too much shading, and we can run into some disease and that kind of mold problems with a canopy that gets too out of control. The other thing that we can kind of show here is a little bit of what I call rolling. It's like a rolling of the canopy. So we have prevailing winds here from the west, and what happens is the canopy will just sort of roll over. And so what we'll do to get this canopy more upright is we'll bring it back up like this, and then we have movable wires, and you can see them down here. We typically grab these, and then we have a way that we can lift this canopy up and get it more upright, so we're not dealing with canopy that's rolled over and blocking clusters on the morning side, which would be the other side of the vine in a spot like this.